if you're finding that you're constantly becoming distracted. And if you find it helpful, you might like to introduce a little bit of counting or noting the breath as a way to help stabilize your attention. Any questions or comments about that meditation? Anyone would like to raise? Yeah.
If you feel pain in your body while the meditation, it's also a sensation. So the concentration goes back and forth to the pain and to the breath.
I mean, ideally, of course, we try to adopt a posture whereby we reduce the likelihood of some sort of pain in the body. I mean, that's one of the reasons for getting a good posture, so that we don't, well, that we reduce the likelihood of that happening. And of course, also, as a beginner, often we're not very flexible, and so some of the pain is just, we're not flexible enough. So then for that, of course, doing some body work, some yoga or something can be very helpful, some stretching exercises, so that we can find ourselves into a posture that we can be comfortable and we don't have that pain, or we reduce the likelihood of that. So prevention, of course, is always the best solution. But then, of course, if pain were to arise, a couple of things. First, often is that it can be that it's not so much pain, it's just sort of some itch or scratch, and our natural tendency, of course, is just to, you know, do this. So I think it's helpful to resist that in this case, that if it's some minor thing, it's just some itch or scratch, is just ignore it, basically. Because every time we do that, it's a distraction, you know. Just let it go, let it go. If, of course, it's something more solid than a little itch or scratch, then a couple of things we can do here as well is, one is that to not develop aversion to it. Because if we have aversion to any discomfort in the body, all that we do is we magnify the amount of suffering. Then it becomes unbearable. So, you know, we can have this idea of what's called acceptance. Acceptance just simply means acknowledge, okay, there's some sensations, because all it is sensations. There's some intense sensations there, okay. And if you do that, then often we can avoid the aversion, and sometimes, therefore, we don't have to do anything, because often it's our aversion that magnifies the discomfort, and then we feel, oh no, that's so too much, I've got to move. So then if we just notice it, and then just come back to the breath and just say, okay, this too shall pass. That's sort of the first line, to do that. But then, of course, if it is that it's quite a lot of discomfort that's pulling us away from the meditation, then at some point I think we need to do something like move to adjust, to overcome that, because otherwise it's too strongly pulling us away from the meditation. So we've got those sort of, you know, the itch, scratch, we can just ignore it. Anything not too major, just sort of acknowledge, okay, and then go back, and not have this, oh, no thing, aversion. And then you may find it'll pass, but if it doesn't, then we can, at some point, we can address it because it's pulling our attention, then we can adjust and shift our posture. So that's sort of what we can do. And then, of course, outside of meditation, do some body work to make sure that our body is flexible and we're adopting a good posture, and to minimize the likelihood of those things coming up in the first place. So that's some things we can do. Otherwise, like you said, it'll just keep pulling our attention there. Anything else anyone would like to bring up? Okay. One or two more things about this practice, and then we'll go straight back into the practice. You may have noticed, if you've done this practice a little bit already in particular, that as your mind settles down, your breathing tends to settle down. Mm-hmm. And that means the sensations here get more subtle. Yeah. So that forces us to pay more attention. So that's actually improving clarity. That the more subtle the breathing, the more subtle the sensations, forcing us to be more attentive. But you may have noticed the opposite as well, is that if our mind gets a little bit agitated, our breathing gets a little bit more rough, which means the sensations here are a bit stronger, so that helps us to avoid getting distracted so easily. So there's this biofeedback loop that's happening here that helps us improve clarity and helps us to avoid a distraction. So that's unique to this object of the sensations at the nostrils, this biofeedback loop. So that's another advantage with using the nostrils. Now, of course, as we progress in this practice, whether we're using nostrils, abdomen, or any sort of physical object, what will happen as we progress in this shamatha practice, as our focus improves, actually our sense faculties will sort of shut down to the point whereby we won't notice any sensations in the body at all. And then, of course, no sensations of the breath. But fortunately, what happens before that shuts down is that if you're focusing on the breath, you get what's called the acquired sign. It's a mental image that sort of spontaneously appears. It's not something you generate. It spontaneously appears, and that is related to the breath. And so when that appears, then switch from the sensations to that mental image. And that mental image can take many different forms depending on the individual. But then you just switch to that mental image and use that the rest of the way in your practice. But I mean, that usually doesn't happen until you're fairly quite advanced already, but just to let you know about that. So eventually in shamatha, if you're using a physical object at the beginning, like sensations, you will need to move to a mental object at some point because the sense faculties slowly become dormant because of the power of your focus. So that's the two things I wanted to mention. So what I'd like to do now is go straight back into this practice again, focusing on the nostrils. And again, if you find counting or noting the breath helpful, use that. Yeah.
The image. What image is that?
Oh, all sorts of things. It can be like a star, a cobweb, a wreath. I mean, it can take on a light. I remember a very long time ago when I first did my first meditation retreat, and at the end of it, someone said, "Did you see the blue light?" And I go, "Blue light? What are you talking about?" I think that person was referring to this acquired sign. But it can take many forms.
It's spontaneous, or you have to...
It's spontaneous, and it depends on the individual what it appears as. It's sort of quite individual, but you'll recognise it. Okay, yeah.
So how do you know it's a sign or it's not a...
Because to get the sign, you need to be quite deep into the practice. So to the point where there's not much conceptual activity going on. So I think at that point, it will be quite obvious that it's not just some thing. It'll be the acquired sign. It's not something that you'll get as a beginner. You have to be quite advanced before it comes up. And then at that stage, because of your stability and clarity, you'll start to more clearly identify these things as that. You'll have that capacity. Okay, let's go back into the practice and then we'll take another short break afterwards. So we begin by preparing the body, keeping the back nice and straight, and allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And preparing the mind, setting it in a state of ease and relaxation. Letting go of all thoughts of the past and the future. In particular, letting go of any expectations for this meditation. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. And now narrow the focus and focus on the sensations of the breath at the entrance of the nostrils. allowing the breathing to flow naturally, not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. And keeping all the muscles in the face soft and relaxed. Relaxing and releasing on the out breath, sharpening the focus on the in breath.